are really excited to have Samantha Bradshaw with us of InLine Legal. I kind of stumbled across her page off of another group that we were both in, and she was offering a webinar about COVID-19 information and the stimulus bills that were coming through. So I went to her webinar and it was amazing. And so I reached out quickly because I was like, she has to hear this. Our group here needs this information, especially where there's just a lot of confusion around that. So that was kind of going into the COVID-19 era, and now she has graciously offered to talk to us about coming out of it and reopening. So thank you so much for being with us, and I'm excited to hear what you have.
Thank you, Shelley. That was a very sweet introduction. I really appreciate it. And yeah, the group that we met in is a lot of fun, and this one has been fantastic so far. I've loved watching you guys interact with everyone. So let's go ahead and get started because there is a lot of information to cover thanks to Governor Northam releasing some stuff yesterday afternoon. So I will try to roll through this kind of quickly. I apologize that it's going to have to be a little faster than I had planned. There's simply more information than I thought there was going to be 48 hours ago. So what are we doing today? We're talking about how your business can reopen during a pandemic. For folks on the digital side where you're working out of your home office, obviously this is an easier transition for you guys, right? This has been the way from the beginning. But if you're still working a job and this is your side hustle, if you have a physical location, if you have employees, if you're meeting clients face to face, then even this physical stuff is going to apply to you in some way. So how we're going to go about this, first I'm going to tell you where you can stay updated on the quickly changing regulations. As I said, there was new information yesterday. I'll show you the different websites, and frankly, you can come to me. I'm doing updates on my Instagram Live every time Northam goes on and talks about the new updates for Virginia. I'd be happy to guide you through things there. I'm going to explain where we are now, which lasts for 2 more days in some parts of the state. I'm going to explain where phase 1 is going to go, which depending on where you live exactly could be on Friday or at the end of the month. So we'll see how that one works. I'm going to explain how your business specifically can fight coronavirus, and then how you protect your time, sanity, and income from a legal perspective, the things that I as a lawyer or any lawyer can do, but I'm better, right? Like, yeah. Can do to help your business and make sure that you stay afloat and put all the protections that you can have in place for the future. So you are in the right place if you have a business of any kind, okay? If you live or work in Virginia, or even if you just might want to open a business at some point in the next 2 years. The reality is this whole coronavirus thing, it's not going away for some time. There is no going back to normal, right? There is, as somebody said earlier, adjusting to the new normal. So that's what we're going to be working out how to do. And that's going to take a while. Now, it does not matter if your business is registered or not. It doesn't matter if you're with the state. It doesn't matter if you're just operating out of your house. It doesn't matter if you have employees, contractors, or you're doing everything yourself as the solopreneur that a lot of people start out as, right? And it doesn't matter if you don't have formal contracts in place. This is still going to apply to you. You're still going to get value out of this. So who am I to tell you all of these wonderful things? I'm Samantha. I am the owner of InLine Legal, Virginia virtual law firm, and it was virtual before coronavirus. Apparently, I was just ahead of the trend. I have been a business attorney for over 7 years, pushing on 8. I worked primarily in the Middle East for 5 years. 5 years? Yeah. In a very small country called Lebanon. Helping Lebanese businesses expand outside of Lebanon and helping international businesses grow into Lebanon. I've done $87 million deals with the government, and I've done $500 things for solopreneurs and everything in between. So as big as you grow, I got you. Don't worry. All of that to say that I am a lawyer, but I am not your lawyer. And I have to give this disclaimer before I go into any more information that all the information I give here today is simply educational. I am not giving you any specific advice because I cannot. I cannot do that until we sign paperwork and I become your lawyer. Until then, I am just a lawyer. Okay, so let's start on the bad news. In January of 2020, the unemployment rate was at 3.6% in the United States, which, you know, pretty nice. Since mid-March, 33.5 million people have filed for unemployment. Now, the general estimates are the numbers are much higher than that because a lot of people, as the financial person, I'm not sure where she went, I can't see her video anymore, was mentioning are furloughed. They've been put on like temporary work, so they're not actually filing for unemployment yet. So we don't know what the true numbers of that actually are. On the bright side, only around 600,000 of those were Virginians. So Virginia's doing better than a lot of other states. I'm physically in Brooklyn, New York right now, and they're not as lucky as Virginia has been in the relative scheme of things. Now, why does any of that matter? One, a lot of you guys are still working on moving the side hustle into a full-time job, so you're well aware of, and I'm sure your friends and partners, significant others may be affected by this. The bigger reason why it matters is when you run your own business, you're the one in charge of this. You're the one that decides if you're employed. You're the one that decides how much money you're making, right? It's your effort. It's not somebody else's decision. Something to think about moving forward. So, remember I told you that I was going to tell you where to stay updated, other than me, of course. But if you don't want to sift through all the documents that I have to do 3 times a week, I'm a good source for that. However, going straight to the source is always a good idea. There's a bunch of websites. There's tons of websites, guys. It's kind of a nightmare. Okay. Obviously, you guys all know the Center for Disease Control. I'm sure you've heard a lot about them recently. They're the ones introducing most of the social distancing guidance that should be followed now. And it's updated as they learn more about the virus. It's adjusted as we try to reopen. The WHO is the World Health Organization, and they're essentially like the international version of the CDC. So they create a lot of this similar content to tell you, best practices for interacting with the client, right? Actually being in a physical office these days. I don't know, how to go to the grocery store safely, right? All of these things are realities because at the end of the day, if you get sick or your partner gets sick or your kid gets sick or your dad or mom or grandma or uncle or brother, whatever, somebody gets sick, it's going to affect you in your business because then you're caring for them or yourself, right? You've got less time. So try to pay attention to the recommended guidance. Moving on to, if you have a physical location, OSHA's putting out guidance that's actually going to become mandatory, right? I don't know if any of you guys know any folks in construction, especially. It's where you see a lot of OSHA violations, people doing very silly things like using a crane to plane the wet cement on a patio. Just hilarious to watch, completely unsafe, officially an OSHA violation. So OSHA's recommending certain things to make physical locations safe again. And if someone witnesses an OSHA violation, they can complain to the Department of Labor, and then you get an investigation, and it's all things you just want to avoid. The fastest moving pieces right now for the guidance to reopen would be your state's executive orders, which everybody here is in Virginia. So if you Google Virginia executive orders, it's the first link when it pops up. And then some counties are imposing local decisions. Virginia specifically, for the longest time, was rejecting this idea of regions opening differently. As I'm going to explain to you, that idea changed on Monday. Virginia was trying to put this one-size-fits-all plan over the entire state. But the reality is that what's happening in Northern Virginia, which unfortunately I know a lot of you guys are in or very near it, is very different than what's happening in Grundy, right? So upon this realization, the governor has decided that regional rules are going to be kind of allowed. So county local decisions are going to start becoming more important moving forward. Before now, they weren't really a thing. On top of that, the White House has issued guidance, but it is guidance. It is not controlling. Your state's orders are controlling, right? So the more guidance you have, of course, that's great, and follow the best practices by all means, but your state's orders will be prioritized over that if you're operating in a physical location, in a physical manner, or physically interacting with clients right now. Some industries have specific guidance already, like restaurants, veterinarians, meat processing plants, organizations caring for the homeless population, amongst others. There are a lot of industries that have not been given specifics. Creative professionals, they've said for professional services, but they've kind of lumped that into lawyers, accounting, banking, finance. They haven't talked about kind of the creative professional side of things specifically. So there's a little wiggle room on that. Photographers are having a hard time. Events have some clear guidance, but not a lot. And I generally expect the state to release more guidance as this goes. And that's why I say you kind of have to just constantly stay updated. So to the CDC, this was pulled from their website, I don't know, 3 or 4 days ago. Sorry, it's fuzzy, it's a screenshot. But generally, they're recommending that you wear face coverings in public, keep 6 feet away. If you're sick, stay home. The same stuff we've been hearing the whole time, right? So on to the specifics. What's happening in Virginia right now, right? Because that's why I told you we were going to go. We were updated. What's happening right now? Virginia currently is under Executive Order 53. There's been a lot of executive orders, guys. It's kind of a mess. That executive order stays in place until May 15th. So you guys have probably heard a lot about reopening. It's not exactly reopening that's going on. What's happening is this order the restrictions are going to be loosened a bit. So as you can see, and you've probably seen this a few times, so I'll go very quickly. There's no in-person classes for K through 12. There's no in-person classes for higher education. If you want food or alcohol or a farmer's market, it's only pickup, it's only takeout, it's only delivery. Gyms, theaters, indoor public amusement, racetracks, your salon, your nail salon, your hair salon, your masseuse, they were all closed, completely closed, period. The locations, right? It was different when you were talking about the individuals, as they found out later. All non-essential retail must limit in-person shopping to no more than 10, with 6 feet of distance between every person. And if you couldn't do that, you had to shut down. No gatherings of more than 10 people, unless in the operation of a business not required to close, which was a little confusing for people, so they wound up clarifying this later on, and I'll get to that. The beaches were closed for everything but fishing and exercise, and in Virginia, it is actually illegal to wear a mask in public because people can't identify your face. So part of the executive order was making it okay to wear a mask in public, since everyone's recommending that you wear a mask in public now. So what did this mean? This meant a few different things. It meant for the photographers taking the beautiful engagement shots at the beach. Those aren't happening right now. If you can't go to the beach unless you're exercising or fishing, unless everybody's got a fishing pole in hand and they can somehow take pictures and catch fish at the same time, I don't see how that's really feasible right now. This also meant that hair and makeup artists, right? They couldn't operate in their salons. The board eventually said that they could give in-home services, and there's going to be some weirdness about this moving forward, and that's why I bring this up now. So I don't know. The whole thing's strange. You've seen how it's operated in the past few weeks. Oh God, how long have we been at this? So that's what expires on Friday for the state, theoretically. Now, Virginia's plan to reopen the state is called Forward. I gotta say, I think West Virginia did it better. They're calling it West Virginia Strong, the comeback, which is kind of epic. And I feel like Virginia really missed an opportunity there for the marketing gurus. But so the point is, how do we get to Forward? I'm just going to call it the comeback. I'm going to pretend it's the comeback. It sounds so much cooler. So how do we get to the comeback? Well, there's a few different phases. They haven't released a lot of details on phases 2 and 3, but the idea is we're theoretically moving into phase 1 on Friday. And this is where the regulations change. So what did we need to do to get there? We needed to see a moving downward percentage of positive tests over 14 days, moving downward trend of hospitalizations over 14 days, and enough hospital beds, intensive care capacity, and PPE for them to not freak out and say, oh dear God, the healthcare system is overwhelmed. Now, most of the state has achieved that. Most of the state didn't get a whole lot of cases really to begin with. And of course, every loss, every illness is a tragedy within itself. But there was this general feeling by the government that, you know, a handful of people unfortunately passing away because of this in, you know, southwestern Virginia or southeastern Virginia did not justify shutting down the economy to the extent they did. Then that's the point of the reopening phase, right? So theoretically, Virginia's kind of there. So what does phase 1 look like? I wish it looked like this. It doesn't look like this. That's not safe. Don't do this right now, okay? Not cool. No, it's actually gonna look like this. That's not great. So why do I say it's gonna look like this? Because phase 1 actually has a specific thing saying that your personal care locations, your salons, your whatever places can operate if everybody wears masks and there's dividers between your chairs and all of this. So let's get into the specifics of that. What is staying the same, right? So as we go out of Executive Order 53, we're moving into Executive Order 61 on Friday. And that goes until June 10th for those of you trying to plan events, because I know that's a thing right now. So that means there's still no in-person classes for anyone, K through 12, higher education, whatever. It's summer. They're all getting out anyway. No difference there, right? It means that theaters, indoor public amusement, and racetracks have to remain closed. It means that you should encourage telework as much as possible. It means that there still are no social gatherings of more than 10 people. And it means the beaches are still closed for everything other than fishing and exercise, which still means no engagement shots on the beach, okay? There's also some stuff about campgrounds, but I don't think anyone here has a business interest in that, so I'm not really going to get into it. You can go if you want. There has to be space. Basics. So what's new? What's changing, right? And that's really what we're after here, right? So the specific industries that are allowed to change are listed in these next 2 slides. And there's generally capacity requirements, whether the employees must wear masks or not if they're interacting with customers, whether the customer has to wear a mask, how often disinfecting needs to happen, and then there's a few random specific things. So as you can see, if you want to go to a restaurant, you cannot dine inside a restaurant right now. But if the restaurant you want to go to has outdoor seating, you are allowed to go sit in their outdoor seating at 50% capacity if all the tables are 6 feet apart and the servers and the bartenders wear masks, but you don't have to wear masks because you're eating and drinking. Like, how are you gonna, I haven't seen a good mask design for being able to eat or drink yet, so somebody will come up with it at some point, I'm sure. Farmers markets are allowed to be open, and in a general semi-normal manner. The lines just have to be further spaced apart, which is actually what New York's been doing the whole time. The farmers market has saved me, guys, because the grocery stores are a nightmare. Non-essential retail. So this is kind of the kicker, right? This is what a lot of folks are asking about, especially the solopreneurs and the small businesses, because the reality is this is probably what you are if you're not fully online. And it's that instead of 10 or less with 6 feet of distancing, now it's 50% capacity with 6 feet of distancing, and that the employees in the physical location must wear masks. It is not an option, right? So trying to think of what non-essential retail would be right now. Picture frames. Oh, Michael's, right? Michael's is non-essential retail. Michael's can reopen. properly, right? With more than 10 people, because Michael's is a huge store and you can put 10 people in it safely and keep 6 feet apart. But yeah, the clients have, the employees have to wear masks. And of course, there is still a statewide recommendation that everybody wear masks in public. So ideally, if you have the ability to wear a mask, you're wearing a mask as a customer. As a reminder, and just a clarification, the essential businesses are the same as before, the same as they've been since March. It's still food, pet supplies, medicine, anything you need to build a home office, the hardware store, liquor stores, state's got to make money, I guess, printing and office supply, laundromats, banks. It's the same. You guys have seen this list before, I'm sure. So if you're not one of those, then you can operate at 50% capacity with the employees wearing masks and blah, 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 right? The other 3 big things that are having changes are, like I said, the salons, gyms, kind of. I don't know how many gyms have outdoor facilities, but I guess we'll find out in the coming days, and churches. So the personal care services, this is the big deal, right? Like everybody wants to go get a haircut. Some of your male family members or significant others might start looking a little rough. Fortunately, mine just kind of shaves his head, so it's pretty easy. But the kicker on this one, this is actually the most strenuous thing moving forward for phase one, is that both the employee and the customer have to wear masks. If the customer has to take off their mask for you to provide the service, it can't happen. So it matters, especially if you're doing like makeup, right? If you've got a mask on covering all this, your girl can do all of the makeup for your eyes, which, let's be real, like that's the most complicated part anyway. And then you go put on your own lipstick and like outside of the salon or something. All of these places have disinfecting requirements that pretty much every hour stuff has to be disinfected, and it has to be disinfected between customers, between clients. And if you can't completely disinfect something, you either can't use it or it has to be like a throwaway, a disposable material. For the personal care services, you can only have 1 client per provider at a time. So, you know, when you're at the hair salon and you see the girl, she does, I don't know, she does your highlights, and then she runs over and, I don't know, cuts some dude's hair, and then runs over and, like, I don't know, waxes some girl's mustache. Yeah, no, that can't be happening. Y'all have to be separated, and it's 1 at a time. I expect prices are probably going to increase to make up for the fact that they can't do that anymore. Generally, if your business cannot adhere to these guidelines, they must close, right? Gyms are weird. They can operate outside, but so there's no inside. The employees have to wear masks, which theoretically means even the guy like teaching the class, because that's what they're gearing this towards, is classes outside. The class can only have 10 people. They all have to be at least 10 feet apart, and you have to be able to disinfect all the equipment. And you're allowed to be in the pool, but only to do laps and 1 person per lane. Sure. If you guys are churchgoers, your churches, there was a bit of a fuss about this between the religious community and Governor Northman. They are officially allowed to open at 50% capacity if each household is at least 6 feet from another household. Okay? So, those are the regulations for the state. But remember I told you how part of the state's not doing so hot? Chances are you guys are in it. Northern Virginia, the 5 larger counties close to DC, the furthest south it goes is Dumfries. So if you're in Stafford, you're fine. If you're in Dumfries or north, you're going to stay under these regulations, which are essentially the old regulations, which clarifies that the salon can't open, right? The church can't have more than 10 people in it with the 6-foot rule. They can't increase to 50% capacity. Teleworking is still encouraged, right? They clarified that the gatherings thing is not in a business, that it's no social gatherings. So for those of you who work around weddings and events, those events are going to have to remain less than 10 people, not just in phase 0 or phase 1, but actually even in phase 2. as Governor Northman has said. And the earliest, the absolute earliest, it's looking like phase 2 could even, or that phase 2 could come into would be June 10th, which events could increase to 50 people. But that's going to be kind of the maximum limit. So I know someone was talking about events, weddings with like 60 people. That sweet spot, that was a really fun place to work in. It's going to have to be like 50 on the dot if we can move into that. But that's in the future, right? We're still not there. How is capacity determined? Is determined by your certificate of occupancy that you should have gotten from the city when you took your space. So yeah, it's the fire code. It should be quite there. That's exactly it. So it's the minimum occupancy. So if you have an occupancy of your room can hold 50 to 75, you have to operate on the 50, not the 75. Okay. So if you're operating at half 50, 25 people are allowed. So big spaces are suddenly going to feel really empty, which could lead to a really weird vibe at events, at weddings, at this kind of thing. Cool. Great. Awesome. So the idea, right, is that they're going to try to not allow counties to set up completely different guidelines. They're trying to force counties to work within this phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 paradigm. And that counties will work together as a region if they have a lot of traveling between them, like the Northern Virginia region does. To decide whether they should stay in one phase or another, or move forward, or go backwards even. And that's very much a reality that people are going to have to be prepared for. If there are outbreaks, we could go backwards in the phases, right? So just because the 50-person gathering could be allowed at the end of June doesn't mean it'll be allowed at the end of July. And that's just something we're going to have to watch day by day. The limit is currently including all staff and guests. Yeah. So I know we were already seeing that, right? When we had the 10-person limit, that, for example, a wedding could be the bride, the groom, the officiant, the photographer, and 3 people from either from the bride and the groom. That's how it's worked before. I presume that's how it will work now. That this guidance, we're not at 50 people yet, right? So they will give more guidance on that later, and that's not going to come until, like I said, at the earliest June 10th. And this is not a hard deadline, right? In all of this, everyone's like, oh, we're opening on May 8th. Okay, we didn't open on May 8th. That already got delayed till May 15th. It's always been this is the earliest possible stage we could move, like lessen restrictions, right? So that's something really crucial to understand. So we'll see, but previously that limit on events was including the staff. I presume that's what it will be going forward, because otherwise you could just say, oh, well, like my cousin's serving drinks in the back. It's okay. We need 10 bartenders. Like that's going to get dodgy really quick. So fun part, there's a lot of people giving out money right now. The webinar that I hosted that Shelly actually joined in on was one on how to figure out where you can get money for your business while this was going on. That federal program, CARES. I'm sure you guys have seen a few things about it, about the emergency grant, the up to $10,000 grant, and the PPP loan, right? There's been tons of information on this because that's been changing every day, and it's an absolute nightmare. EIDL is officially out of money, so that one's gone. PPP is still going. So if you're interested in that program, I highly recommend, I've got a link to it somewhere. If you're interested in it, I can send you a link to the previous webinar that I did, so you can see if you're eligible. The thing is, self-employed folks are eligible. So it was something that was a weird change for a lot of solopreneurs and beginning entrepreneurs that didn't have employees yet, and they weren't aware of this. On top of that, the fun part is everybody and their mom is trying to throw money at this because it's really good PR for the big companies right now, right? Facebook has a grants program. The woman who started Spanx, God bless her, started a grant program as well. Local institutions are doing it. Stafford's even got one where they're giving out super low interest loans to businesses. And I'm talking really low interest, the point where it's almost not free money, but it's really cheap money. So if that's something that can help, it's definitely something to look towards. It's not, you're not alone in this, right? There are so many companies and so many options right now for figuring out how to move forward. All right, so how your business can fight the Rona. First thing, adhere to the law, right? Follow the guidelines and orders that I've been explaining to you guys for 25 minutes now. Because if you don't follow the executive orders specifically, it is officially a misdemeanor, right? Enforcement has been subject to kind of local authorities and how they want to go about this, but that's not something you want. They dragged the woman in Texas to jail, right, for opening up her hair salon. I don't think anyone's going to drag you to jail. They have the right to. They can. Like, they could drag that woman in Texas, but at minimum, they can fine you. And they can fine you like $2,500. And that's just, it's not worth it, guys. It's not worth the personal risk. It's not worth the financial risk. Like, just follow. If you do happen to have employees, there are new requirements that even though you're a very small business, they have to be put on paid sick leave. So following the guidelines will also make sure your employees don't get sick and you're not paying for them to get well from a bed. Although you should, that's a nice thing to do. Most of the country does, and most of the rest of the world does it. But that is productivity out of your business and money out of your pocket. It is guidance to wear the mask. So wear the mask in public, y'all. Just follow the guidance. It truly is for your benefit. Telework as much as you can. These webinars that we're doing right now, these conversations, they work. They do. I was building an entire law firm on this idea, and the world has figured out that it's actually okay to work like this, which is kind of great, but you know, it's good. So do your part to slow the spread. You're going to need to be flexible. You got to stay up to date, like I said, either through those websites that I gave you, or check out InLine Legal on Instagram. I'm doing updates, Virginia-specific updates at least. And knowing that we could be moving between phases for quite some time, right? A 10-person event could be okay now. 50-person event might not later. Maybe I can get my hair cut. Maybe I can't. You just have to be able to adjust, to pivot, to move with it. Wonderful saying that you catch more bees with honey than vinegar. When you're dealing with your own clients or service providers, remember at the end of the day, there's a person on the other side, right? Just because there's an LLC in front of their name or incorporated or something, there are still people running these businesses, and we're all in this psychotic position. So there's a lot of understanding going around. Try not to break your relationships. They've gotten you this far. So, being really strict about things may not be the best idea. Although in general, I recommend that you hang on to what you can. Flexibility is going to be crucial right now. If you've got clients that work with you one-on-one and things are delayed because you can't get supplies, because you can't get out, because you can't get to the post office, because somebody's sick, communicate, be proactive, talk to them. People are generally quite understanding, and even more so now. So how do you protect your time, sanity, and income apart from learning how to say no, right? That one I can't help you with. That's on you. That's a mindset thing. Go find some guru. I can't help. Where I can help is a few different ways. With business registration, if you are not registered yet, you are putting yourself in some personal liability if something were to go wrong with your business. In the general sense, what registering your business as an LLC or a corporation does, the most basic level, is that it puts up a wall between the finances of your business and your personal finances. So that way, if you buy something for your business, it remains kind of in this bubble. And if a client gets mad, if a service provider gets mad, they can't come and take your house to pay for it. They can only take what your business has, right? So think of them as like two separate pots, and they can't cross over. That's essentially what this does. There's a lot of stuff to it, but that's the most basic level. In a lot of ways, it gives you some legitimacy. And later down the road, I know taxes are terrible right now, trying to figure them all out, but it does make it cheaper to move on, right? There are options for tax elections. that can make sure that you are an employee of your business, that you can go on unemployment outside of a pandemic, that your tax burden is lower. And those are things that we can talk about in more detail another time. But this is just kind of like a high level thing of, these are your options. They are here. They're here to protect you. There is business insurance, but generally they won't work with you unless you're registered. So if you are registered, then I recommend that you consider business insurance. There's specifically something called interruption liability. It means that if for any reason, if your business simply can't operate, right? Like you've been shut down by an executive order by the governor of Virginia, that's a good reason. Then they potentially pay out in the same way as if your house got taken out by a hurricane. I'm from the coast, so Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Hampton, like we got hit with them all the time. Everybody was used to this. But it operates in a similar manner. But you have to be really, really careful of the language in your insurance contract, because that contract was still written by a lawyer trying to make sure you don't get paid out as much as possible. So you have to look for specific language in that. In light of that, contracts. Contracts are also how you protect yourself. Pro tip, try to get your contracts signed by both you and whoever it is you're working with, your client, your service provider, whatever. I know I personally use DocuSign because it's one of the stronger ones. They have all these tracking information to make sure that it's personally identifiable signatures and all this. But in general, e-signatures, one, are completely valid, both in Virginia and at the federal level. It's great. Right? You don't have to physically give something to someone. You don't have to email a PDF and ask them to print it out and scan it and send it back to you. No. Two, you're more likely to get a signature if you're doing e-signatures. And if it's not signed, then you can't take that contract to court. And the idea is we want to avoid you going to court at all costs. But if you have to, then you want to make sure that you're not fighting it out to the end to only be told, well, no, your client didn't sign it. Good luck. Contracts can be emails or a series of texts between you and a service provider, you and a client, you and a customer. But that gets ugly. That gets weird. It's messy. You're kind of figuring out the terms, the provisions of the contract as you go. And that's asking for trouble. It is much easier to say, here is one document, right? Everything that could possibly go wrong is in this one document. And, except maybe a pandemic. We'll get to that. So I'm going to go over just a few of the really crucial clauses that if you have a contract, you need to make sure they're in there. If you don't have a contract, you should start thinking about exactly how it would work best for your business. These are simply examples. That doesn't mean that's what works for you, right? If you're a digital Etsy shop versus a wedding photographer, your cancellation policy, right? It's a digital Etsy shop. There is no cancellation policy. But you definitely have refund policies, and they're going to be completely different, okay? So this rescheduling clause, for example, is taken from a boudoir photography agreement. And this one's fairly strict with giving like one request to reschedule for free as long as it's further out to allow the photographer to find a new client to fill that spot that day. But as it continues going on, if it's too close to the original date or you've done it more than once, like, I don't know, you're just being a flooze, then you start forfeiting some of the fee, right, that you've already paid, and you have to pay it again to kind of get your spot back. Now, this can go all the way from something like this to, I don't do rescheduling, you just forfeit all your money, to, yeah, let me know 24 hours before, that's fine, no big deal. And anything in between. Again, it's got to suit your business. So you've got to be careful with templates that you at least know that there's options in the template that you can choose from. Because I've seen a lot of non-lawyers try to create these clauses themselves. And it doesn't work because they don't understand that it has to work with all the other parts of the contract, right? There's a lot of situations with, well, I rescheduled because the photographer was sick, and then the weather was bad, and then my husband didn't want to do it that day, and now I want pictures, but I want them now, and I want them early, and this could bring a lot of things together. So you've got to make sure the contract is cohesive as one. So writing your own clauses, I don't really recommend. and making sure that if you're working from a template, that it has options that you can choose for your own business. Cancellation clauses are pretty clear, right? But when we're talking about events right now, that's a big deal, right? There's a lot of weddings that are, it's wedding season, right? If you can't have a gathering of more than 10, that big wedding venue suddenly doesn't make any sense financially for anybody involved. So on a very simple way, if you're talking kind of lower cost things, cancellations can simply be, no, I don't do cancellations. You can reschedule. Or it can be, as long as you cancel more than X days in advance, I will refund everything. Or it can be something along the lines of, you can cancel up to 15 days beforehand. If you don't cancel then you forfeit your down payment, retainer, whatever the case may be. But if you have a contract, go look at these. And remember that even if you think you don't have a contract, your emails, your texts, your policies on your website can be read as terms that kind of create a contract between you and your client, right? These may not all be in one place. The other two big ones that I really recommend looking at right now are we'll start with the refund clause because it's easier. All right. Simply, I mean, you guys are all dealing with this. There are no refunds. There can be, I have a 14-day money back guarantee. There can be, if your product is damaged when it arrives, I'll refund, but you pay shipping. There could be, I pay shipping if you don't even like it. Like, the shoe companies, right? The online shoe companies, they're doing this. Like, if you don't like it, just send it back. We'll pay for everything. Okay. There's this range, right? And that's the thing. In all of these clauses, there's this range of how strict, how lenient you can be, and you have to decide where you fall in that. Sure, if you guys have ever rented a house or an apartment or something on Airbnb for vacation, you've noticed they have different provisions for cancellation and rescheduling. And if you've ever worked from the renter, the person owning the house side of Airbnb, it shows you when you first go on, like, this is our most lenient policy, this is our moderate policy, this is our strict policy. You literally just pick one. That's kind of how this stuff works, right? But there's more than 3 options. There's a whole range designed to suit your business. Finally, and here's the kicker that all the lawyers are kind of going back to law school for right now, something called a force majeure clause. And what this means is essentially if there is an act of God, if there is something completely unforeseeable, something that nobody could have predicted, like a global pandemic, then we potentially can get out of this contract, right? We can release ourselves from having to do what we agreed to do. And we're seeing a lot of this in event spaces right now, frankly, right? Like if you're like, oh, well, I had booked 150 person wedding and now I can only have 10 people there or even 50 people, I never could have guessed that the governor was going to say for 2-3 months that I could only have 10 people in one spot. There's something in the law, it's not a contractual idea, but generally that if your event, if the reason you wrote the contract is now impossible, completely. Like I was going to hold a St. Patty's Day event, right? And St. Patty's Day, we were limited to 10 people and the bars were closed. Okay, well now it just doesn't make any sense to hold a St. Patty's Day event in July. Like that's dumb. I did this specifically for that, right? So that's another idea that if it's just become completely impossible for you to hold the thing that you wanted to do in the original meaning that you were trying to do it in, that's also a way to get out of contracts. And that works not only for the person on the customer or client side of the contract, but also, the business, right? If it makes more sense for me to cancel your 150 person event and say, I'm going to turn this into an indoor campground, 10 kids can come and I'm going to jack up the price. Maybe that's an option that makes more sense for the business, right? All of this to say, talk to the people that have already booked anything with you, have already bought anything with you. Communicate, be proactive. It's really weird. Force majeure clauses, though, traditionally are read really strictly. And what does that mean? That means that if it doesn't specifically say pandemic or a law or an order from the government, it may not work, right? So just because you have that clause, it's very helpful to have a lawyer go through and be like, no, but it's missing this and you kind of need this portion. Because I've worked internationally, all of my force majeure clauses had pandemic in it before the pandemic, because I've seen pandemics in other parts of the world. Americans haven't really seen pandemics, so American lawyers haven't put pandemic in it. Mine had civil wars, riots, unrest, the whole thing. I had an insurance program for a motorcycle that actually had this put on there of like, your motorcycle gets taken out because of civil war. It's not our fault. We won't pay for it. That's insane in America. In the rest of the world, it's a possibility. So sometimes it's useful to work with someone who's been outside of your bubble. All this to say, your contracts are definitely going to be a protection for you, because lawsuits are expensive, guys. Like, to try to get a lawyer and fight it yourself, you're looking at anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 a month just in legal fees, as long as the litigation goes on. Like, it is the thing you want to avoid with everything in you. And a well-written contract and somebody to help you write letters to the other side, and making sure that we're taking the emotion out of it and just making it a business decision, which is hard to do when it's your business, right? These are the things that will get you to work out some kind of compromise that will help you avoid the lawsuit. In light of that, shameless plug, I offer monthly subscription packages where I can do those things for you. My cheapest one is $99 a month, and it means I'm yours. You can call me. You can make an appointment with me at any time and say, the governor has a new order. What does that mean for my business? And I will sit here and tell you specifically for your business and exactly how that runs, what that means for you, instead of this very general kind of information that I can give now, because I'm not your lawyer. I'm simply a lawyer. And the thing is with what I'm building is that it can grow with your business. As you get bigger, it will get bigger with you, right? You have more needs, then it has more benefits. Sorry. You're welcome to peek around on my website. It's www.inlinelegal.com. It's there. Send me a message. Happy to chat, truly. Some general specifics, just as an FYI, before we wrap this up, is that at the end of April, Governor Northam, he delayed some laws, put in some new laws, some coronavirus specific things, some non-coronavirus specific things that are just kind of entertaining. That there are no evictions or foreclosures for anyone who lost their income due to COVID. So that does not mean you won't have to pay the money, but that means they won't make you homeless right now, right? Which is a comfort, I think, for a lot of people. There was a minimum wage increase that was supposed to kick in on January 1st. So a lot of businesses were planning on that, because $2.25 increase, that's fairly significant. That has been delayed until May of next year. I could see it being delayed even longer, depending on how the situation works out. If they determine that it's better for businesses and the economy in a whole, and I don't know, there's a lot of stuff in that. Possession of marijuana is now punishable only by a fine of $25, as long as it's only a little bit. So I don't know, glaucoma, something. And unemployment, it says is open for self-employed and gig workers. Last week, actually, they sent out the first checks, because traditionally self-employed people and independent contractors, gig workers, did not qualify for self-employment. In the current situation, they do, and Virginia is beginning to process that. Even if you were denied before, if you've applied for this, reapply or appeal. They are processing those claims now, and they are actually going through. So to wrap it up, remember that you're doing business with people, right? Even the big corporation, you can get through to a person, and everyone's in kind of a weird spot right now. So simply try to be understanding, be kind, right? Even if you have an awesome contract, maybe don't beat somebody over the head with it right now. It's not the best time. And maintaining those relationships is going to allow your business to get through this rather than to crumble under, like, unfortunately, a lot of people are. So that's it, right? Focus on how to get you through. And that's what I got. So, does anybody have any questions? You can unmute yourselves, or type them in the chat, whatever you're more comfortable with. And while you guys are thinking, if you have any questions, thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. You can email me directly at sbradshaw@inlinelegal.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm much more active on Instagram. So if you're there, I highly recommend following me on there. Like I said, updates every time Northam goes on with anything significant for businesses. He is actually expected to go on today at 2 to announce if the executive order will actually expire on Friday. It seems like it will, but let's see. Take a minute. So yeah, does anyone have any questions? That was a lot. I'm sorry. That's a lot. That's a lot of information.
That was fantastic. You did an excellent job, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate people were asking questions as they went through. Thanks, Liz. It's hard to kind of understand as it does change and what it does apply to, and what does that mean, especially if you are sole proprietor and you're trying to figure it out yourself. You don't have a team or a brilliant attorney on your side. So one of your slides said that people, if you got sick, they could be paid for sick leave while they're sick.
Yes.
I'm assuming that that is specifically if they got sick with corona while at work. They had the diagnosis of corona
Let me
or
pull
COVID.
this up actually. So this was something I did on, let me see if I can find the
Sick paid leave
program. Okay, so what this was is, while I've searched for it, I'll try to talk through it. Generally, businesses under 50 people in the United States did not have to provide any sort of paid sick leave for their employees. Essentially, they were deemed kind of too small and it was too burdensome on them. There was a federal law, and this was the previous webinar that I did that went over all this federal law stuff, and that's why I'm trying to pull up the slide now to see if I can show you guys. What this federal law did was said that even every business under 500 employees had to offer paid sick leave to their employees. Is this it? I think I found it. And paid family medical leave to their employees. And that was going to be applied to anyone who was sick, who was told by a doctor to isolate, whose kid wasn't at school because the schools were closed, right? Let me see here. I found it now. All right, so the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It was passed on March 18th at the very beginning of this. And essentially what that meant was that any employee, and this only applied to employees, right? So if you're self-employed, it didn't work for you, unless you have an LLC and you filed for an S-Corp tax election and made yourself an employee, which I don't think anyone here has. That's another level of like, call me when you're making $150,000 in profit, and then we'll talk, because that one's fun. That's when this stuff gets real interesting. But so for employees, and I know this is good information, even if some of you are still employees, your partners are employees, right? Like so. Employees must be granted up to 2 weeks of paid sick leave if the employee was subject to a quarantine order, if their doctor advised them to quarantine, if they were experiencing any symptoms of COVID, right? So fever, cough, dry mouth, lack of ability to taste and smell. There was a weird thing with the toe for a minute. And this whole thing is evolving, right? Like I don't know if you guys are following, it's primarily in New York, but what's happening in New York keeps working through the rest of the country. There are kids in the hospitals now with symptoms that don't match what the adults are having. So I'm sure that list is going to be further expanded even. This paid sick leave also applied to anyone who was caring for someone who had been ordered to quarantine, or for a child whose child care was now unavailable. And that paid sick leave had to be paid, it was capped at, depending on the reason, either $500 a day or $200 a day. Essentially, if you were caring for someone, it was the $200 a day, and if it was you directly, it was the $511 a day. for those 2 weeks. On the other side, there's the paid family leave, right? Which was broken down in the idea that you have to grant up to 12 weeks of paid leave if the employee can't work because they have to comply with a quarantine order, stay-at-home order, or they have to care for a kid whose childcare or daycare was closed by this. The first 10 days of that were allowed to be unpaid, but that's where the paid sick leave came in, right? So the first 2 weeks would be paid sick leave. And the remaining part of the family leave would have been paid at 2/3 of the regular employee rate, capped at $200 a day, right? So essentially what that meant, if you had to stay home for 3 months because you had to care for a parent, especially in this whole situation, right? If you yourself are vulnerable population and have a note from your doctor, if your kid is not in school, then you could take essentially 2 weeks of full-time paid leave, right, at your full pay, and then the remaining 10 weeks at like a 2/3 thing, subject to the caps of the $200, $500 a day, depending on exactly what's going on. And that's federal law, so it doesn't matter where you are. That's for every employee. Okay, Alyssa. I am putting together an all-inclusive wedding package for couples in which photo and flowers are included. What do I need to think about? Are there any legal considerations? So weddings, right? Weddings have been a huge discussion of all of this, right? Because they're events, and the event restrictions are the biggest thing coming from the state that's going to restrict your ability to do any of that, right? So as I said, now we're still at 10 people for the event restrictions. Moving forward, we're going to be there for a moment. It's not changing anytime soon. Even once it does release, it's still going to be capped at 50. So that's something you need to take into consideration when creating your rescheduling and cancellation clauses, and exactly what you're going to do with your retainer. Never call it a deposit, guys. If you're taking deposits, deposits are refundable. Retainers are yours. Okay? There's your tip for the day. Go find your contract. If the word deposit is in it, take it out now. Please, please. I hate the word. I can't stand the word. So you're going to have to consider what you're willing to do, depending on exactly how strict you want to be, right? And that's what I was saying. There's this range of ways that you can evaluate your own rescheduling, cancellation, refund clauses, provisions in your contract. We call them clauses, right? Lawyer speak. So in that, you're going to have this moment of, the reality is for the next year, maybe even 2, rescheduling is just going to be a reality. Now, you can choose to have a strict rescheduling clause and then be the nice guy and be like, oh, I'll waive this for you. However, while I generally recommend that you let the contract be the bad guy, this is kind of my thing. You can play good cop, bad cop with your client. They come in and say, oh, no, I need to do this thing. You're like, well, the contract says you can't do this. But I'll be a lovely business owner and waive this provision for you this one time. And, now you're happy and grateful that I've done something nice for you, but not really. The reality is, the future moving forward, that may not be the best way to go. Simply because that requires extra communication on your part and extra negotiation. And part of the contract is that it takes away the negotiation, right? It forces that boundary initially when they show up. So knowing that, it may be better to go more middle of the road with the rescheduling clauses, and kind of subject them to any of the governor's orders and event restrictions. I'm personally working on something that I'm going to release in the next month as businesses do open up. It's kind of a liability waiver. I don't know if it will be enforceable. We have no idea, because this entire situation is new and no one's ever had to waive liability for a potentially deadly virus that they could catch by picking up the wrong glass before. But I'm operating on the idea that if you can waive the liability for dying while skydiving, then maybe you can do it for a small business. I don't know. Let's see how it goes. I'm putting this together as like a small template that I'm going to sell for a reasonable price. That people can kind of fill in the blanks for their own business. waiting to see a little more guidance to make sure that that comes out stronger than not. The other thing I consider, there's a provision that I put in all of the photographer contracts that I work for, which has come in handy, is that a safe working environment provision, which essentially means that if you, as the provider, it doesn't have to be photography, it can be anything, but that if you as the provider don't feel comfortable going to whatever location you were supposed to go to and providing your services there, for a legitimate reason, of course, then that gives you a way to say, no, this is not what I signed up for, right? So what you saw especially is a lot of wedding photographers that were supposed to go to Italy 2 months ago. If they had these provisions, they could be like, that's a hot spot. Like, y'all are great. Y'all can go. I'm not going anywhere. I see a lot of people turning New York City into that. Like I said, I'm in Brooklyn. I can't imagine anybody wanting to come here right now. It's just don't wait a while. New York City will still be here when it's over. That's definitely something I recommended looking at if you're personally interacting with clients. If you're simply acting as a coordinator, right, then you definitely need to make sure that you've got some information in your contract about what happens if the supply chain gets disrupted. Do you want to be held liable because the florist couldn't get a hold of whatever weird flower the bride wanted? No, right? You don't want that to come back on you. In general, if you're working with subcontractors like this that you require to put together your package, then you're also going to want to make sure that your contractors are contractors and not employees, which is a whole nother discussion because the line between them is really fine. But there's something that you can look for in your contract that says that your business is not responsible for anything the contractors do unless you authorize them to do it expressly. So there's a few ways to make that work, and that's definitely something where for the foreseeable future I see a lot of wiggle room with how that's going to work, especially with the gathering restrictions. Anything else? Sorry, that was a brain dump of information.
No, that was great, and I'm so grateful that this is recorded.
I had 2 questions actually. The first is I liked the West Virginia marketing effort too. So are we allowed to use that? Can we call it the comeback? Is there like legal concerns if we use that?
I don't know if West Virginia was fast enough to trademark the comeback or not. But Virginia is officially calling theirs forward.
Okay. I might I might borrow that for sure. My other
is good, right?
Yeah, really good. My other question was related to contractors versus employees. And so I'm sure that it is a more complicated item, but if you were to hire contractors on for some work or project or effort, would we be responsible for providing these kind of benefits that Virginia is expecting from other employers? Or
no, that is strictly for employees. All the stuff that I was just talking about, right? That paid family leave, the paid time off, all of this stuff is strictly for employees. Now, a lot of businesses, when they're starting to grow from solopreneur into I need some help, and then eventually it turns into I need actual employees, right? This is generally the path. That middle ground between solopreneur and registered employees is really, to be quite frank, most businesses get it wrong. Evaluating businesses as a legal professional, a lot of the times when they tell me, oh, this is my contractor, I'm like, no, that's an employee. I can do a quick 2-minute thing, maybe. I could try to cram it in 2 minutes, the difference. Generally, look, the biggest things between deciding whether a legal professional, a judge, the Department of Labor, which could become a problem, right? When they're deciding if that person is an employee or a contractor, is they're going to look at how much control you have as the business owner over what that other worker does. So if you tell them, you have to show up at 9, you can leave at 5, here's your workstation, I give you your laptop stays here, I need the password for everything, I own everything you create while you're here. that's employee, even if you're calling them a contractor. The more realistic version of the contractor side of that is, I just did this webinar. I want to, I don't know, break it up into little chunks, and I want some graphics to go with it. So I need someone to edit the video and pull some screenshots out of it of like me when I'm smiling and not like a face. And I send the video over to that person and just say, this is what I need. I need it by, I don't know, Friday. Here's $500. That's a contractor, right? I didn't give them their equipment. I didn't say what hours they had to work. I didn't tell them how to do it. I just said what I needed, a deadline, here's money. Generally, another good way to think about it is if the person can negotiate with you, they're a contractor, right? If you say $500, they're like, no, $700, contractor. If you say $500 and they say, oh, that's not, like $500. You're like, but that's not really $500. They're an employee. Okay, those are some fairly concrete examples that I think will help you draw the line between them. The benefit of contractors and why everyone kind of leans towards them is that you don't have to give them all those benefits, right? That you don't have to pay their self-employment tax, that you don't have to pay their employment taxes, that it's on them to pay their self-employment taxes. In the end, it's potentially cheaper for you, but a smart contractor will, let's say a virtual assistant as an employee, you pay $10 an hour. A smart virtual assistant as a contractor will charge you $15 an hour because they know that they're paying that stuff extra and you're not. If you're a service provider, that's something to also take into consideration for your pricing, right? That stuff is going to come out of you in the back end.
Thank you.
Of course.
Are there any considerations that we should be thinking about right now in terms of shipping clauses or terms?
So there's the shipping clauses. I mean, there are international terms for shipping that a lot of people use when they're operating at massive scale. For small businesses, unless you're sending out a whole lot of product on a regular basis, what's your thing again?
I have an Etsy shop for calligraphy.
Right. So you're sending out physical products, right? Not just digital?
Correct.
Yeah. Legally, I think if you've got some like terms on an Etsy shop that say, I aim to get stuff out by then, but I'm not subject to whatever UPS or USPS or FedEx or whatever, brown, purple, blue, whoever they are. That's on them, right? And this is part of that contractor discussion, right? When you hand your box of calligraphy to wedding invitations, right? Or signs. This is what you were talking about, right? When you hand that over to them, they're a contractor. They're operating as a third-party business. And that's more just a communication with your client. It is legal. It can be legal. But that's a really easy one of just be like, with every order, put in a thing of, I don't know what the shipping things are right now. I'll let you know when I send it out. I'll give you a tracking number. Good luck. And that's what I've seen from most businesses with physical products right now. And again, because the entire world is in this circumstance, everyone's kind of understanding, right? It's not just, oh, there was an earthquake in California and I ordered something from there and I wasn't affected by an earthquake in California. I don't understand. No. Everyone's in the same boat right now, which really does make this an easier situation. Tracking numbers. Tracking numbers are a good thing. Yeah, if you don't do that already, highly recommend it. High dollar value items, insurance, because that one, I've seen that one get ugly quick. But if all the stuff you're shipping is, under like $250, you can probably write that off into the cost of doing business. I mean, you'll have to set your own boundary for what that is, but yeah, when you start talking about products in the thousands of dollars or even upper hundreds, that's when it becomes that moment of you don't want to have to absorb that cost,
And you've covered so much, Samantha. I just wanted to give one other opportunity because we're going to have a great amazing audience, much larger, that's going to lean in and listen to this at a later time, and is going to glean from your wisdom as well. So with that being said, is there anything that you want to say to a potential 500 other female business entrepreneurs out there that are navigating reopening or relaunching or just stepping out? Is there anything that you would like to say to them in closing, or us in closing?
Sure. Look, the reality is everyone's at a different point in their business journey, right? Whether you're still thinking of the idea, whether you're moving into side hustle, thinking about quitting your job, replacing your own income, or whether you're at the point where you're like, okay, cool, I'm making a solid chunk of change, and you're trying to grow, right? You're trying to hit that 6-figure mark. That's amazing. And it's never too early to start learning this stuff, right? The conversation that we had today about the 5-minute chunk that we had today about employees versus independent contractors. Just because you don't have the money to hire anybody in any capacity right now doesn't mean that you shouldn't be aware of these things moving down the road. Legal stuff, much like medical, is infinitely cheaper if you do it in the beginning, right? An ounce of prevention is worth 10 pounds of cure. That number that I gave to you about litigation costing $2,000 to $10,000 a month, as long as the litigation is going on, or you can pay for a contract at the front end and then just not have it happen because everybody knew exactly where they stood from the beginning. Not to say that there's ever going to be a perfect system, because people are not perfect and things happen. But protecting yourself, giving yourself as much of a foundation as you possibly can to start on, that's the way to start this. That's the way that you grow. That's the way that this continues, and you can beat the odds of staying in business, right? Because the reality is, I'm sure you guys have seen the numbers, within a year, the vast majority of businesses fail.
Mm-hmm.
In 5 years, almost all of them fail. And they fail for tons of reasons, but a lot of them, I've seen so many, they get the first subpoena, they get the first court case, and they're terrified. And they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then they go to a lawyer, and the lawyer says, well, you've made a mess of things. It's going to cost me thousands of dollars to fix it. And they're like, oh, this isn't worth it. Screw this, I'm out. If you talk to us from the beginning, if you make those foundations, the legal foundations, the tax foundations, the financial foundations, you've all got good ideas. It's not a lack of good ideas. That's never what kills anyone, right? It's these things. It's the foundational things. So get those right. And earlier is better than later.
Yep, absolutely. That's good, excellent advice. And thank you. And thank you for joining us today. This was brilliant on so many layers and levels for us.
If you guys want to check up on the Governor Northman's address today without watching the entire hour-long thing, that's my Instagram handle. Like I said, he goes on every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 2. About half of the time, there's something specific to small businesses, and I do a little text thing and put the details that are relevant to y'all.
That's amazing.
Please. It's easier than digging through 10 million articles. I swear, it really is.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you, ladies. Go do great things. We're cheering you on. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.